In this installment of our Meet the Author series, Dr. Teemu Taira will discussing his recent book, Atheism in 5 Minutes, Equinox 2022. Teemu Taira is a senior lecturer in the study of religion at the University of Helsinki. His work focuses on public discourses on religion and atheism, media discourses in particular, and methodology in the study of religion. He's the author of Taking Religion Seriously, Essays on the Discursive Study of Religion, editor of Atheism in 5 Minutes, and co-author of Media Portrayals of Religion and the Secular Sacred. He has edited special issues on the new visibilities of atheism in Europe and written multiple articles and chapters on new atheism, atheism in the media, and atheism and non-religion in Finland. He has contributed to several handbooks on the topic of atheism, secularism, and non-religion: the Cambridge History of Atheism, Handbook of Leaving Religion, the Oxford Handbook of Digital Religion, and Handbook of Language and Politics. He is also the author of 4 Finnish-language monographs, one of them focusing on the new visibility of atheism. Okay, so I will leave the room for Teemu to do his presentation, and after that we'll have a moment for questions, comments, and exchanges. So Teemu, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you for the introduction and thank you for the invitation to join this. Hello, everyone. I can see that there's a good number of people who have contributed to the volume. So I can see Nathan, Atko, Lori, Brian, and Sarah. So yeah, a good number of contributors. I'll just share the screen and talk a bit about the volume, and hopefully we'll get soon to the more interesting part where we can discuss, and I will be keen on hearing what you have to say and what topics you might be interested in knowing and asking and sharing. So this is perhaps a little bit different type of meeting in this series, because I think that most of the previous ones have been those where people present their own research mainly, but this is an edited volume and more like a teaching resource rather than original research concerning atheism. But we'll see how it goes. This is the cover of the book. I don't know how many of you have read it. I know that it is often the case that if you contribute to something, you don't necessarily read the outcome, but sometimes you do. Anyway, Atheism in 5 Minutes was published last November, so it's been out for about 6 months. And it is part of the series published by Equinox. And at the moment, if I'm correct, there are 5 volumes out in the series. Buddhism in 5 minutes, Hinduism in 5 minutes, indigenous religious traditions in 5 minutes, and religion in 5 minutes. Those in addition to atheism in 5 minutes. And I think that at least 7 titles are forthcoming and are contracted. The idea of the series is that each chapter should be possible to read in about 5 minutes. So all the chapters are very short. And all the chapters are based on questions. I think that this series originated so that Janet Joyce from Equinox approached Aaron Hughes and Russell McCutcheon, who are the series editors, with the idea of editing a volume, Religion in 5 minutes. And if I'm not wrong. Buddhism in 5 minutes was published earlier, and it was later integrated to this series. But it was done separately from what Aaron and Russell have done, because Aaron and Russell have been involved in contracting all the other volumes in the series. And I think the publisher takes this quite seriously, because e-versions of the books have also cross-references to other books, so that let's say if your library has access to all of them, then you can navigate from one volume to another quite easily, depending on your interests. But they provide suggestions to chapters in other volumes. Yeah, so something about the background of the volume. I was having a short 6 months research leave in 2020, in the middle of pandemic, when I was finishing my monograph, and then I was exchanging emails with Russell McCutcheon on something completely different, and then I just asked in one of the emails whether anyone has proposed to do atheism in 5 minutes for this series, and Russell said no one has proposed that, and asked whether there would be enough material for such a volume. Then I thought, okay, the Cambridge History of Atheism will have more than 1,000 pages and tens of articles, and I see no problem with finding 60 to 80 questions for this volume. And then Russell contacted Aaron Hughes, who's another editor in this series, and then the publisher got involved, and I think this volume was contracted 1 week later from the first email I sent to Russell, and then just a couple of weeks later from the early contact with Russell, I had submitted first invitations to potential contributors. So, and it was published in November 2022, as I said already. It has 64 chapters and altogether 43 contributors. The idea of the volume is that it is targeted for first-year students or beginners who are interested in the topic, or perhaps anyone who has a question regarding atheism. But I would also say that it has potentially important secondary readers, like students more generally, perhaps even media professionals, and other scholars. Why not? That's my question. Why not for scholars as well? I remember being in one conference where I browsed some books that were on display, and then a colleague of mine was having a copy of Religion in 5 minutes, and I mentioned that, yeah, I've read the volume. I quite enjoyed it. I quite enjoyed the idea of the volume. And then this colleague of mine said, I don't like it. I don't like the idea. I don't like the idea that something should be sort of done in 5 minutes. That okay, well, perhaps no one seriously thinks that you'll be a master of any topic in 5 minutes. But what I really liked about the volume is that it wasn't just about answering the question, but thinking about the implications of the question itself, whatever the question was. And when I was reading Religion in 5 Minutes, I also thought that, well, how would I answer to that question? Or how would I deal with the question in classroom, for example? So in that sense, I think this series as a whole is quite useful for scholars also, not just for beginners. I mean, I've read, or at least browsed through all the published volumes in the series, mainly because I was doing the cross-references to those that were already out. Okay, so then I'd like to pick up the question of why there's atheism in the title. Why not something else, something related, such as non-religion, secular, or irreligion? And I don't have a perfect answer to that. I just thought that atheism is a term that may be more catchy than any other alternative option. And my intention was never to limit the approach to atheism, but to use maybe more narrow concept in the title and let contributors then expand, if necessary, to talk about non-religion or irreligion or secular, and specify if the data they've been using is about something else than atheism. So I didn't want to put strict boundaries to the term atheism or even definition of atheism, because practically in the volume it depends on the contributor whether they are defining atheism analytically or whether they are just using atheism as a term of identification, for example. And in some sense, it would be nice to just say that in this volume, atheism is understood as da, and then we stick to that. But I think I have relatively good pedagogical justification for not doing that. I wanted this approach to be inclusive so that students or anyone who wants to know more about the topic will learn to pay attention to differences in these terms, because that's what they have to do anyway if they want to know more about the topic, read through the publications, because there are several slightly different definitions people use, and some people don't use specific definitions of atheism or non-religion, but analyze how the terms are used or how people use those terms as points of identification. So people have to learn to navigate through that jungle anyway. So this volume at least gives a signal that that's one of the issues people have to pay attention to. So that's why atheism in the title, but not as an exclusive approach. But it's more about atheism and a little bit about the related categories in 5 minutes. And I think there is possibility of some misunderstandings in this, because I think at some point publisher in very early stage ask whether, for example, agnosticism will be covered in the volume. So the question implied that maybe atheism is understood narrowly. And then I explained that, well, yeah, in some way agnosticism will be covered, but my intention is to understand atheism quite broadly in this in this volume. Like some of the other volumes in this series, I had the opportunity to get student questions. So in September 2020, my colleagues who were running the introductory course to the study of religion at the University of Helsinki asked their students to provide questions, and questions about atheism, like what would you like to know about atheism? And I received more than 200 questions. And then I had my own list. And I even asked my partner, who's academic but not in study of religion or atheism at all. I asked her what would you like to know? What so she gave some suggestions, and then I also wanted to think about what kind of stereotypes are there regarding atheism, whether they could be covered somehow in the book. Then I also thought about encounters with ordinary people, students. What have they asked about the topic when I've been teaching or visiting schools or something like that? I browsed through handbooks and edited volumes to see that my list is somehow related to what research about atheism has covered, although I didn't have to replicate any of the questions or the selection of questions. Then I also paid some attention to approaches, that there's enough variety in approaches. Like my background is in religious studies or study of religion, so I wanted that to be covered, but also sociology, anthropology, history, psychology, and also a little bit about these standard humanities, stuff like literature or art and media studies. So I wanted the emphasis to be on empirical, social scientific approaches to the topic. And I decided that I don't want philosophical or theological approaches to be dominant. I wanted to include some of those questions and authors, but I wanted to make sure that that's not the dominant part of the volume, because that's not my primary interest area with regard to atheism. Selection of contributors was a complex process. First question I had in mind always was, who is the best possible author for this topic? And then I also had to think about second choice and third choice. In some cases, we were in the middle of the pandemic situation. People were busy. For some, even a short text like this was too much at that point, and I perfectly understand that. I also asked other contributors to make some recommendations, and I think Nathan was very active in that, so thank you once more. And others were giving good recommendations too. So that was very important. And it's interesting that even though in the invitation I mentioned the length of the chapter, that it's something like maximum 1,000 words, some didn't realize that I'm asking people to contribute to such a short chapter, and said that, well, maybe this works, but I don't know about the schedule. And then one contributor submitted the text quite soon and emailed that, well, I didn't realize that it was such a short one. So there you go. And one contributor actually Sami Pihlström, who's my colleague from the University of Helsinki, sent his text the next day. I submitted the invitation letter to him, and he said, "Oh, this is such a short text that I don't bother sending any abstract." I said, "Okay, but the publisher would like to have abstract anyway." But the text was there already before the abstract, almost in the published form. Yeah, but I wanted to think about also so that different geographical areas are covered. I wanted to think about gender balance. That's still not perfect, but I wanted to consider that. Also, I wanted to consider a little bit about the ethnicity aspect, so that there's variety, at least a little bit. And I didn't want too many critics of atheism to be involved, and not too many atheist activists. So I wanted to make sure that I didn't exclude anyone with those criteria, but I just kept in mind that I don't want the balance to be in any end of the continuum, if we can talk about continuum. So yeah, I mean, I think I'm okay with the end result, but this is something I struggled with a little bit when sending invitations. One issue was important for me, and that was that this is not a book about atheism in the United States. I wanted the United States to be covered, but that the emphasis doesn't have to be there any more than it can be in Europe or even elsewhere. But obviously, the result is still quite Euro-American. But maybe that reflects the actual scholarship on atheism as well. About the editorial approach, I'm just briefly saying that this volume is not encyclopedia or even handbook, but it's more teaching resource. And that's why when I approached people who have done research on the topic, you can get answers quite easily. So one of the main things I tried to do in the editorial work was to suggest that perhaps this could be questioning the question itself more, or not ending with final answer, but leave something to think about in the future. And I particularly enjoy in this whole series those chapters that are not simply answers to the question, but somehow challenge the question itself and maybe pose other questions that might be more appropriate for or at least worthy of further thinking. And it is pretty clear that some authors were more experienced in writing these types of texts than others. Some were struggling a little bit, and I'm not. This is not my judgment as such, but their own. I'm just using their own expression, what they told me. And in some cases, I submitted examples from Religion in 5 minutes to some authors, so they can see what type of approach some contributors to that volume have taken. But I would still say that in most cases, my editorial input was relatively moderate. I wrote 8 chapters myself and preface. The final chapter, What is the Future of Atheism, is there because that was a requirement. Later on, I realized that that's not the case in all volumes in the series, but still I understood that that's a requirement. So I put it there as a final chapter. And that's the idea, was that it is written by the editor. So I didn't even offer that to anyone as a topic. And these are the chapters I wrote myself. Some of them reflect my research interests better than others. In some cases, I thought that I can be in reserve for almost any topic if I can't find the author to do the chapter, or if I get plenty of rejections, or if someone for some reason cannot finish their chapter, then I can think that, okay, maybe I can do that in that case. But I think in the ideal world, I would have written a bit less, but this is the end result, and I have to live with that. Some of those are chapters I didn't want to write, like this chapter 12, Are There Atheistic Religions? I offered it to at least two scholars, but they always came back to me that no, that's not what they want to take. But they, in some cases, wrote other chapters. And I just read that chapter yesterday, and I think that's in some sense a good example of a chapter which doesn't have much substantial knowledge about religious traditions, but sort of tries to switch the lens by which we think about this question itself. So that was my choice, because I don't necessarily like the question. So I thought maybe we should ask what people are aiming at, what they are trying to achieve when they are labeling some religions as atheistic, and why that's important in the first place. Then I did a bit of what I would call alignment work, sort of that there were some chapters I decided to do so that they are follow-ups for the previous chapters. Like Isabella Kasselstrand's, one of the chapters she wrote is, what are the most atheistic societies? So I decided to do the next chapter to that. Why are some societies more atheistic than others? And then there's chapter 61, do atheists value some religions more than other religions? So I decided to do follow-up to that. What do atheists value in religion, if anything? So that some of the questions sort of fulfill each other, or complement each other. And perhaps what the chapters that were closest to what I'm really interested in nowadays in my own research is related to they are related to media and popular culture, atheism and media culture, and that's why I wanted to make sure that those chapters get to the final book. They are not all necessarily authentic student questions. Well, the internet, I think, is, if I remember right, but I don't think anyone posed a question about popular culture, but I wanted to include that. So it's there to remind readers that perhaps some further studies could be made about those topics. So that was my personal decision to include those. Okay, I haven't received much detailed feedback yet. The book hasn't been out that so long, and I'm quite fine with the end product. But I think that probably no one agrees with all chapters, and I don't necessarily agree with all the details in all chapters, but that was never my point. My point was to make sure that this volume represents a variety of academic views and approaches, but of course with an emphasis to those approaches and disciplines I am most interested in. One final slide. I want to highlight this research interests of mine, focusing on atheism in media and media culture, because there's not much research on that as such. So I hope to do at some point in the future. I want to be a bit vague on purpose, because I don't want to advertise anything that's not necessarily finished anytime soon. But what I hope to do is to write sort of introductory study of atheism in media culture that would synthesize previous research and include original research as well, but be more introductory in style. That would cover news media, the internet, film and television, documentary films, and popular music. And I have published about atheism and news media. I've written about atheism and the internet, atheism and documentary films, and I've lectured about atheism in films and television, and also about atheism and popular music, and drafted chapters on those topics. So I have quite a lot of text in draft form. Still, I would need to do more research on news media to update my earlier work on this topic, and there's still quite a lot of work to do so that I can synthesize previous research properly. But this is where I hope to go next. So thank you for your attention. I'm ready to discuss more with you.
That was really great, Teemu. Thank you so much. I see people clapping there. So thank you everyone. So now we will start the Q&A, or any comment you want to give. You can either say it yourself, or you can write it in the comments and I can read it for you. So please feel free, go ahead. You can raise your hand as well. I see Sarah. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Teemu. This is really fascinating to see the background of how this book came together, because Joel and I were very happy to contribute 2 chapters to this edited volume, and it was really fun for us because it's a different kind of chapter, right? It's a different kind of edited volume. There's more people involved, and they're much shorter, which made it very pleasant to write in my case. And but I wanted to, so it's fun to see how it came, how you pulled it all together, which is pretty amazing because it was a large group of people. So to have put it all together is I want to congratulate you. Is probably a large endeavor, successfully accomplished. And I wanted to put the question of the last chapter to you, because it's one, I did read the chapter 64. It's one I'm interested in, but I'd also like to hear your thoughts if you still think the same, or how it's evolved, and for those who haven't read the book. And that question is, what is the future of atheism?
Yeah. That's the question. I'm not particularly interested in providing any definite answer, because well, when I was writing that chapter, I read quite a lot of those works focusing on fertility and religion. So when I reread that chapter, I thought there's surprisingly a lot about that, and I don't think that fertility rate is any kind of explanatory tool, but it seems to go hand in hand with so many other developments, so that it correlates quite nicely to society, with the level of religiosity in societies. Yeah, I think I wanted to put this kind of start with this sort of more universal, grand explanatory framework in that chapter, picking up those predictive models, either scholars or research centers like Pew Research Center have made. But then I wanted to put a bit more skeptical tone in the chapter to question how well have we as scholars been able to predict changes in religiosity in general, or atheism for that matter. And I also wanted to emphasize a bit about this idea that even if we have these some general trends we can see from data where societies are going, we still need to be sensitive to local, more regional and historical narratives, because that is what we need when we think about developments in particular countries, for example. Even similar countries may have very different trajectories when it comes to whether people are atheists or whether they use the label about themselves. And as probably most of us know, the general predictions that they are that really globally religious affiliation will rise globally, but still there are particular areas where atheism is clearly on the rise. So I just wanted to paint the sort of overall picture that we see those tendencies. They are somewhat contradictory. Maybe you can see some kind of coherent picture there, but I don't take a strong approach in that I would favor one particular version of those predictions that are there. Rather, I put some skeptical ideas about how we have been poor in predicting religiosity in the past, and also I think it's in the final paragraph that I also want people to pay attention what other people are doing with these predictions. They can be political tools as well. So yeah, that was sort of this sort of more like, again, going to the pedagogical dimension rather than making an argument about the future of atheism.
Great, thank you, Teemu. There is a question by Hannah in the comments. I'm curious to know, was there a specific chapter that was particularly difficult to recruit an author for, or were any questions removed because of this issue, the pandemic?
Yeah, I can't remember whether any questions were removed as such. it may be that at later stage, I thought that this or that could have been included, but I don't have time anymore because my schedule was relatively tight. So quite early on in the process, I had to decide that, okay, this is it. I don't want to add any more questions. I'm just trying to see whether it was particularly difficult to find authors. I wouldn't say so. It was more about making sure that those who have said yes will deliver their chapters in the end. Because some contributors, I'm not saying any names, were struggling with that. And then I started to worry, if they don't do their chapters, will I have enough time to get another one? And who would it be? I didn't want it to be me every single time. So that was my worry. And yeah, particularly difficult for tragic reasons was this chapter 47, Are Children Born Atheists? Because it was supposed to be a single-authored chapter by Thomas Coleman, but unfortunately he died during the process. And perhaps I can say this, that he submitted almost complete chapter very early, and then I gave feedback, and I think it would have required perhaps half a day or one day to finish the chapter. And then something happened, and he wanted Andrew Atkinson to be his co-author, and Andrew said yes, and I said I don't have any problem with that. And then in the end, it was the case that the end product is more Andrew's chapter than the original draft Thomas Coleman submitted. But this was something that at some point I wasn't sure what's going to happen with the chapter, whether it will be there at all. And I definitely wanted this question to be in the book.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Is there any other question? I see Ryan raising his hand. Please go ahead.
I always have questions, Guada. Hi, Teemu. Good to see you. Thanks for the presentation. Thanks for inviting me to write a couple of chapters. I have a couple questions for you. And again, like it's a little awkward with these, but you don't have to answer. You don't have to single out any authors, right? But was there a chapter that you recruited an author for, and then when they submitted it, that you were like, I totally disagree with what they said? So that's kind of a challenging question to answer. And then what was like, in reading all the chapters that came in, what was the most interesting point that someone made in one of their chapters? So two questions for you.
First one is easier. There was at least one, maybe two chapters that I thought that, yeah, I don't agree with this version. So we need to change at least a few things that I wanted to put a strong editorial suggestion that maybe change this bit. So there were some of those not whole chapters, no, but some bits. And I think more problematic in general was that when I approached someone to write a chapter, I imagined what it should look like, and then something different comes to me, and then I have said, okay, this is fine too. It doesn't look like a chapter I imagined, but it's still fine. And then there wasn't a single case when I said that, oh no, this is not going to be in the book, I'm going to approach someone else. So all who submitted their chapters made their way into the book in the end. This is not always the case in edited volumes for different reasons, but it is interesting because I've met some of the contributors. I know some of the contributors quite well, and some of those contributors are those I've never met. I've never been in any contact with them before. I just Googled that, okay, this person has written about this or that, let's approach this one. So yeah, maybe the emphasis in some of the chapters and that's more like, but I don't know, it may look very different for readers than to me, because I had already imagined what would be the ideal version of the chapter. And because there are so many different approaches, you can approach, let's take one example, are atheists immoral? That's something that you can take as an empirical question with data, or you can give a philosophical account to that. And the end result is different depending on your approach. Yeah. So yeah, that's something that you can think in different ways. In some cases, I gave some suggestions that maybe you could check this article, that this has quite good ideas that you may want to include somehow to your thinking on how you approach this topic. So yeah, I did that type of editorial work as well, but with a relatively light touch, I think. Where there really surprises, probably not. I would have to think more about this second question, so can't answer now. Maybe later.
Great, thanks for that, Teemu. There is a question by Sarah in the comments. Thank you so much for your presentation. I really enjoyed the text. I'm wondering if you think atheistic religions will continue to grow in popularity. And do you think atheistic religions have the potential to contribute to changing definitions of religion in the popular imagination? Or do you think different new terms will be used?
I mean, I'm not particularly interested in the concept of atheistic religions, so I find it difficult to answer that question if it implies that I would agree with the concept. That's what I did with the chapter, that I suggested that maybe we should look at those who pose the question of whether some religions are atheist, whether that's a way to legitimate some or delegitimate some groups, if they are understood as atheistic religions. Normally, the term is attached to, or it can be attached to almost any religions. So there is a chapter on Christian atheism in that volume. There are several Jews who consider themselves atheists, but not necessarily say that, they don't necessarily say that this is an atheistic religion, but it can be, depending on what you mean by religion. And Buddhism is quite stereotypically understood as atheistic religion, at least in popular imagination. Maybe it is atheistic in a sense that there's no omnipotent creator God, but definitely Buddhism contains ideas that would be labeled as religious in most academic, according to most academic definitions. So that's, I wrote that chapter partly because I think it was an actual student question, but also because I'm not comfortable with the term. But I think it is still interesting to study if people themselves understand their groups and they are involving to be atheistic religions. I'd be interested in knowing what they mean by that, what type of work that does with them. Okay, Ryan, Sarah comments.
There is a question. Yeah, because there is a question by Ryan, would the Satanic Temple be considered an atheistic religion?
Well, I don't know why it should be labeled, or I don't know why scholars should label it religious group. I know some do. Some think that that's important, but not for me. I think it is more important or more interesting for me what the Satanic Temple aims to achieve by presenting themselves as religious. And that is the sort of to get the same rights as some Christians, or get rid of all privileges given to so-called religious groups and actors.
Great, thanks for that. There is Laurie has her hands raised.
Ryan, I'd just like to point out chapter 19, are pagans and Satanists really atheists? You could take a look and, see what Morris said here. Teemu, I know that you always welcome, kind of critical engagement and what have you, and I don't think I'm going to offer you any of that. I just wanted to say thank you, obviously for including me in this volume, but it's also an incredible contribution for those of us who are thinking about more broadly non-religion, but also atheism. It's a real go-to. I know, as you said, it can be used as a textbook, but it's also just a very handy reference for all of us who are thinking, oh, who's working on this? Oh, who's been thinking about that? It's so it will be, on my shelf, close at hand. I confess I haven't read all the chapters because I've been away from my home desk for the better part of the last 6 months. But it's in the pile of to read in detail contributions, and I have looked through the table of contents and skimmed a few bits. One of the things I really appreciate about the volume is that it, I think, really lends a lot of nuance to thinking about atheism and the study of atheism, that we get a wide range of perspectives, and even, people who have written multiple chapters, including you, that this is in no way a detraction. I mean, you have obviously a great deal of knowledge, but I really appreciate the whole concept of the volume, the nuance that it brings. It's kind of a very handy reference tool, and also, I mean, it does include some very, very good scholarship. As I was looking at it, one of the chapters that really intrigued me was actually the beginning of Atko's chapter, when he talks about the Oprah incident, and it raised something for me that's a kind of ongoing, perplexing issue, and that is what I've talked about as the will to religion, and the need to keep pulling non-religious and including atheists back into religion somehow. And I think the last question, in part, that was what you were reacting to, but there's this need to always have the conversation around somehow imagining, oh, if an atheist experiences awe, therefore they must really be religious, the kind of lived religion extension. So I don't know if you want to comment on that, but I'm really looking forward to being able to have some time with the volume beyond just a quick skim through, because it is truly an exceptional contribution. And thank you.
Yeah, just a quick comment that some of the chapters are sort of modeled according to the idea that you can sort of carry on with the idea that whether atheism is a religion or not, or whether it's how is it comparable, because there are questions about beliefs, experiences, texts, rituals, just before Atko's spiritual chapter. So I wanted to include those aspects there. So I didn't write any of those myself, but I decided to leave those questions to others. But yeah, I mean, thank you for your kind words, and I have to say that this has been a great learning experience for me, because I've had to get to know people in different areas, what they have done, and sort of I'm grateful for those who suggested contributors, and I also did a bit of Googling and learned a lot.
Thank you so much, Teemu. I'm afraid we have run out of time. It was a really interesting presentation, and always the comments and the questions are so interesting. So I'm really thankful for everyone for being here and the exchange. I will leave Nathan to give you some information. And thank you again, Teemu, and thank you again, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Guada. I just included a link in the chat to sign up for our mailing list for the NCF project, so you can keep up to date with everything we're up to. This was the last webinar for the term, but we'll have a full lineup for the fall. One thing I do want to note is that we're excited about. We're going to release a podcast in the coming week or 2 weeks. And so if you're on a mailing list, you'll get an update about the podcast when it's out, and we're really excited about it and hope that people listen and enjoy and share it around. So thanks again, Teemu, for the presentation, for everyone, for the discussion afterwards.
Goodbye, everyone.